And good morning, and this is the Philadelphia College Prep Roundtable Financial Aid Training Session through the PCPRUniversity in collaboration with Pennsylvania Association of Student Financial Aid Administrators, Pennsylvania Higher Education Assistance Agency, Sallie Mae, and other financial aid stakeholders. We are so happy to see you all here.
Good morning, and again, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for this important informational session on understanding financial aid offers. My name is Darwin Morency, and I'll be moderating today's session. Our presenter today is Carrie Neidig. She comes to you from Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. She's worked in financial aid for over 21 years and has a passion for helping people navigate through the process of paying for college. We're also joined by Katrina Kelly of Westchester University. She provides additional insight as well for us today. Each of us are members of the Pennsylvania Association of Student Financial Aid Administrators and are grateful for the opportunity to speak with you today. In today's session, we'll introduce you to the financial aid offer, what it is, key terms surrounding it, how financial aid offers are determined, and how to help your students decode that offer. At that, I'll hand it over to you, Carrie.
Thank you, Darwin. And forgive me, everyone, for when I turn my head this way, because that's where the controls are, but my video's here. So what I'm going to do as we kind of get kicked off here, we want to really create this to be a conversation. Certainly, to Tom's point, if you have questions throughout as we're speaking, for either Katrina, myself, or Darwin, just general questions or thoughts, please feel free to put them into the chat. We will monitor them. While we get kicked off, I'm actually going to take my camera down. I am not hardwired in. We had this whole conversation before we got started, and I really want to try to avoid perhaps being in a very flattering position and frozen on your screen. So I'm actually going to take my video down. Certainly wanted to say hello, thank you again, and thank you, Darwin, for kind of kicking us off. And so as we get started, we're going to just really get started by looking at some information that I want to really level set the conversation. So we're going to kick this off by providing information from research that Sallie Mae conducts to essentially provide that baseline understanding as to what college-bound high school juniors and seniors and their parents tell us causes them confusion and stress when it comes to paying for college. So we can essentially use this as a framework to have a conversation about specifically what is a financial aid offer, how do we help them, and how can we help our families understand not just what it is, but how to compare them. We do also, and I will just point out, when I reference research, the study itself is called College Confidence: What America Knows About Paying for College, and it was conducted in late summer and early fall of 2021. And again, these were college-bound high school juniors and seniors, as well as parents of college-bound high school juniors and seniors. And so it does provide a national view when it comes to that confidence. So kind of jumping right into the research. Now, we may be familiar, many of us are familiar with some of the headlines that we're seeing within higher education. Now, there are recent polls that state there's a decline in the perceived confidence and value of obtaining a higher education, obtaining that undergraduate degree. Now, with that being said, our study indicates that the vast majority of high school students still believe that a degree will provide better opportunities in the long run or a good job. Now, equally as many families and students, that same percentage, 81%, they're stressed about how to pay for it. And so the stress that families feel is directly connected to the behavior that they seek.
So, Katrina, I'd like to bring you in on this. How does this stress manifest itself to students' behavior, right? And also, are there signs that we should be looking for beyond their just informing us of this stress?
So one of the things that I've noticed in my years in financial aid is avoidance. So the students who typically don't reach out to us and have tasks that they need to complete or things like that, and just not logging into their campus email, things like that, those are the students that we really kind of target to get more information from and just be like, hey, we're here. These are the resources. There is I guess a fear of talking to financial aid offices because talking about finances can be really stressful. It can be really personal and things like that. So the most thing that we in financial aid offices do is try to make us as accessible as possible and provide as much information at the get-go when they first get in contact with the university, not just when they're admitted and actually here.
Honest with you, and just thinking about one of the ways stress manifests itself is silence, right? So how do we kind of connect those dots and help families understand where to go and that who to talk to, which is why we're all here, right? It's why we all do what we do. And so when we talk about, I'm going to shift a little, just talk about perception, specifically the perception of cost and how it impacts which colleges families consider. Not just where families enroll, where a student might ultimately end up, but really all the way at that very beginning, to Kat's point, even perhaps before they're admitted to an individual institution. Now, the study that Sally Mae conducted finds that almost 70% of respondents, remember these are college-bound high school juniors and seniors and their parents, view private schools as more expensive than public schools. And 55% say they agree that the amount they will pay for college was more than the sticker price, or they didn't know. So now the two questions that you see on this slide, it is clear that not all perceptions and assumptions are accurate. So what you're looking at here, the first bar graph shows the percentage of respondents who agreed in green, neither agreed or disagreed in blue, disagreed in that coral color, or they just didn't know in gray, whether the amount families actually pay for college is lower than the price that is advertised by the school. According to our research, 18% of families agreed with this statement. That's in the green section. So 18% agree that what a family will pay is lower than the advertised cost. Now, in reality, some national data sources show us that the net price of college for more than 60% of students is less. So where more than 60% of students will pay less than the sticker price, that's the important piece of financial aid, that's where financial aid comes in, only 18% believe that to be true. Now, another perception that's confirmed in the data that you see here on that second bar graph, we asked families about their agreement with the statement, private schools are always more expensive than public schools. And this is where we grabbed that 70%. So roughly 69% agree with that statement, basically. So, but what we understand, so in reality, on average, private schools do cost more than public schools. But the actual cost that an individual student and family will pay is dependent on their unique situation. We also understand that private schools many times offer larger financial aid and scholarship packages than perhaps a public institution can. And we are going to dig into that. Now, we do also understand some of the uncertainty that you see here that's reflected on this slide comes from the fact that at the time that they're providing this information, when this survey was conducted, it was prior to the family and the student knowing what is their net price. We also seek information and research studies from current undergraduate students. That research is called How America Pays for College. We've been conducting that study for 15 years. The most recent study last year showed us that, again, cost continues to be a critical component in the decisions that families ultimately make when it comes to researching a school or applying to an institution. An alarming number, though, is that 61, so about 6 in 10 current undergraduate students eliminated a school based on cost before they even decided which school to research, which is well before they applied for financial aid, before they applied for admission or were even accepted. So that is an alarming number. Now, we do expect families, right? There is a reality to paying for college. So the concern isn't about being prudent with cost. The concern is that families are eliminating schools based on the sticker price before they actually know what the true cost is. And so when I think about these statistics, and Katrina, this is a question for you. I'm sure you have students and families that fall into these categories. They're hard to identify, right? Because, you know, it's kind of a reliance on how do you kind of push information out to families earlier. And admittedly, this one's personal for me. I was one of these students in high school. I'm a first-generation college graduate. My family believed, and I believed, that private institutions were always more expensive than publics. And that misconception impacted where I applied. I actually only applied to one school. It's a public school in our state, which I had a very great experience. So it's not actually a negative view. I just didn't know that I had options. And so, Kat, when you think about those families, particularly working on a college campus, how do you work? How do you help, work through these kinds of misconceptions?
Yeah, so I currently work at a PASHE school, a public school, Westchester University. But prior to that, I worked at Widener University, which is a private school. And one of the things that I talk about when I talk to families is, I mean, you hit the nail on the head when you talk about the sticker price. So while on the surface, the tuition at Westchester is admittedly lower than the tuition itself at Widener. That's where the award letter comes in. That's where the actual financial aid piece of it comes in, because a student, could apply to both, say, Westchester and Widener, and have two very different total out-of-pocket costs. So after all the financial aid is applied, after all scholarships, everything like that, have two very different costs associated. So that's really where financial aid advisors need to talk with the students and families, being like, okay, well, here is what and in the industry we call a cost of attendance. So that's all of the things that like tuition and fees, but also things that the school does not bill for, like travel expenses, personal care, books, etc. And subtracting out the financial aid and what their bottom line is going to be. And that's where can be more affordable than people necessarily think when it comes to private schools.
Some additional key points that we'll go through. So thank you very much for that answer. And we will actually dig a little bit more, actually quite a bit more into that, the concept of what are those true costs and how do we help families really kind of navigate the net, right? The actual costs to their individual situation. Now, I'm not going to go through all of this slide. I just really wanted to showcase it for a moment, just to say, there is confusion, right? So this particular slide really digs into familiarity and understanding of the different components of the financial aid process. And so you see the financial aid offer, right? That the actual letter at the top, scholarships and grants, federal student loans, federal Parent Plus loans, and federal work study. And we will dig into these components. The key here is there's a lot of different colors on this slide. You can see that really is just, without me going through every one of these individually, just showcasing there's not a tremendous amount of familiarity and awareness with all of the components. Now, scholarships, and this is good news, is the most familiar piece. 76% of families say they're very or somewhat familiar with scholarships, but there's far more confusion when it comes to the financial aid offer itself and all those other components: grants, student loans, federal parent loans, and federal work study.
So,
and here's, oh, sorry, Darwin, go ahead, please.
good. So, well, I was gonna say, with respects to what you just covered, wanted to bring Katrina in. Have you found any resources or activities that are helpful when it comes to, explaining various terminology?
Yeah, so one of the things I had talked about earlier was cost of attendance, that terminology. When it comes to, because as Carrie said, grants, people understand scholarships, but when it comes to grants, they're not really sure what that means. So what we like to do is say, this is what your free money is. So that's the money that does not need to be repaid versus your loans, kind of thing. So, and then explaining those things. When you look at an award letter, a lot of schools, what they'll do is have, this is your cost, and then it'll show minus your scholarships and grants, and then that's what your out-of-pocket cost is, and then it'll also show minus your any loans that you're accepting, and that's what your out-of-pocket cost is. So it can kind of differentiate what your free, kind of the free grants, free scholarships, the free money is, and then the loans that need to be repaid.
Thank you.
We will be remiss. We can't talk about financial aid and financial aid offers without, touching on, I know there was some additional information perhaps in an earlier session, but just touching on the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid. We won't go into this significantly, but the key here is that this is the first step, right? This is the application, the first step for applying for federal, state, as well as financial aid from the institution or the actual individual college or university itself. It is available beginning October 1st of the student's senior year. And some financial aid, which we'll talk about, does come on a first come, first served basis. And so it is important to remind students to be aware of not only institutional deadlines that the individual schools might have, but as well as deadlines for Pennsylvania. So for Pennsylvania residents, and we will talk a little bit more about the grant programs that VIA provides, but specifically the Pennsylvania state grant deadline is May 1st. So there are deadlines. It is important to be aware of what those are. If you are working with students that have not completed the FAFSA yet, it is not too late. They can certainly, your seniors in high school can absolutely still apply for financial aid. This is that kind of number one document. It's also important just quickly to note the student does not need to be accepted to file the FAFSA. In other words, accepted for admission. They can list up to 10 colleges and universities to receive their information. But again, remember to kind of keep those deadlines in the back of their mind, because for instance, Kat mentioned Westchester and Widener, they may have different priority deadlines for their institution. And they're typically published on a school's website, or certainly, again, these offices are approachable. They are happy to have conversations with you, whether that be admissions or financial aid, to help walk you through those deadlines. And so we've been kind of dancing around, really what exactly is a financial aid offer. We understand a little bit more about how families feel about the process. And so digging into the kind of meat of this discussion, once a student is accepted for admission to an institution and they have completed the financial aid paperwork, primarily the FAFSA, that free application for federal student aid, the student will receive notification that outlines how much the institution will cost and what kind of financial aid that they are eligible to receive. It will include federal, state, and institutional resources.
So, Terry, quickly, you mentioned some schools call it a letter, right? So can I assume that I'll get a physical letter emailed with this information?
Every school may have their own delivery process, and Kat, you can keep me honest here. Some schools, and actually I should probably back up. I have a freshman at Northampton Community College, and I have a high school senior we are right in the midst of this process right now. And I can tell you the schools that he has applied to, some mailed a physical letter while others provided an email or access to a student portal in which he actually has access to log in. It is very important to remember that the financial aid offer is sent to the student. It is not sent to the parent. And so if it is an electronic delivery system reminds your students, right, to be checking those emails and or school portals. Kat, did I miss anything there? Am I being honest in that response?
No, that's absolutely accurate. Each school kind of delivers their own award letters differently. Like at Westchester, everything's electronic. We don't mail anything. When it comes from the financial aid office, it is all emailed and it is all to the student.
I won't even, this again, this just shows us, and this is why we're all here, right? There is confusion about not just what is included on the financial aid offer, but it is difficult for families to interpret. I've worked in this industry for, I'm going to date myself, like Darwin said in the quick little intro, for a long time. I really didn't think, my background is in the financial aid office at private institutions in the Lehigh Valley as well. I didn't think I could be confused. I'm not gonna lie. I really didn't think I'd be confused by this process. Now, my son that's a senior was also being recruited for athletics, which did add a little bit, it did muddy the waters a little bit. But even as somebody who really understands this world, I was confused. There's different jargon, there's different timelines, there's different methods of delivery. Financial aid offers are not standardized in the way that they're presented to families. And so there's work to be done, right? And there's work to be done in helping families really understand the various sources on those offers and how to actually read something that is not going to look the same school by school.
So Kerry, to quickly follow up on that, since this can be really tricky and challenging simply because there's various forms and naming conventions that schools use, Katrina, can you help us out and just kind of share if you found a good way to help students compare and understand the various award offers?
Yeah, so there's a couple of different comparison tools that are available. I know that FIA has one. The school itself that they're applying to might have an actual comparison tool. Some of those things are great. One of the things that I'd like to mention about the different award letters is that when you're viewing them, it might have the financial aid divided between fall and spring. It might have cost of attendance on there. And cost of attendance, I mentioned it before, but when it comes to that terminology, cost of attendance is not, it's an inflated cost. So it doesn't include it's not the tuition and fees, what that sticker price is. That is things that the school, basically what is going to cost a student to live for the academic year and attend school. So like books, personal care, travel expenses, those kinds of things. So each cost of attendance is not the billable charges that what you see on the award letter. And one of the things I saw in the chat was a question of, is there anything on the horizon regarding standardizing award letters? And someone else did put in the chat that there is bipartisan there's bipartisan legislature in the works right now. There are some requirements that schools have to include on the award letter, and cost of attendance is one of them. So cost of attendance is something that you should see on every single award letter from all of the schools.
Yeah, and actually, and I appreciate you kind of pointing out in the chat, because I apologize, I can't see it when I'm sharing my screen, but I will say, and that's absolutely right. There is some work being done right now. There are some groups and different professional organizations that are kind of putting their heads together. To Kat's point, there are some required pieces that must be on a financial aid offer, but the manner in which they are presented, I call it jargon, right? The jargon that's used, the words that are used isn't necessarily standard. So there is some work to be done. And this has actually hit the headlines it does every once in a while. It hit the headlines recently again. So there is some work being done. And so the hope is, right, that we will get to the point where, I don't want to say there's a standardized form is the hope, but that it is more clear to families so that this slide that's still up on your screen, we can find that it's less confusing to interpret. And Kat touched on some of these things. We're just going to briefly go into them a little bit more. So thinking about how that offer is determined, it is a process, right? So again, and we'll actually go into some of these, again, I call it jargon, it's actually right on the next slide, but the first thing that a school will do is determine if a family is eligible for federal aid, state aid, and institutional aid, and that is determined, again, by filling out that FAFSA form. That is that very first step. There may be supplemental applications that an institution will require. And so, again, that's something, and I can tell you from experience, all but one school only required the FAFSA for my son, but there was an institution that did require a supplemental application. In this regard, it was the College Board CSS profile that we needed to complete. Some schools may have their own institutional application. And so again, that is important. It's not always just the FAFSA, but the school will communicate with that as well.
Okay, and quickly, just want to bring Kat in on this. So does this mean that students are able to view the financial aid offer once you know, the FAFSA is completed and any supplemental applications as well?
I wish. So once the FAFSA is completed, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get an award letter right away. A lot of schools, so one, the student has to be fully accepted by the admissions office, and then we need to get the FAFSA itself. So the FAFSA information, what we're looking at in financial aid offices is that EFC. So that's the estimated family contribution. Now I'm using that term EFC. This is only going to apply for this current academic year and the 23-24 academic year. If any of you have seen my previous presentation on the FAFSA in this series, you'll know that FAFSA simplification is on the horizon, and that term EFC is going away after the 23-24 FAFSA. So what schools do is once we get the FAFSA information, we take that EFC, which determines eligibility for federal, state grants, and some institutional aid, and subtract the cost of attendance, right? So again, that budget, subtract the EFC, that equals financial need. So financial need determines a lot of institutional aid, whether it is in a public school or a private school. So for example, if a student, their EFC from the FAFSA determines that they are eligible for a federal Pell Grant, which we'll get into later, but a federal Pell Grant, that student is going to receive a federal Pell Grant on each award letter, on each school that they apply to, whereas the amount of institutional aid can vary on the different award letters. So the amount for state aid could vary based off of school. We'll get more into that later, but the big things is if you have a FAFSA completed and it is sent to the school, you're not going to get an instantaneous award letter. It usually takes some time, in some cases, several months, maybe several weeks. If you're applying to a school in September, you might not get a financial aid award letter until January or February.
I've actually found that out the hard way. My son has a couple and we're still waiting on a couple. So
yeah, Westchester hasn't even sent out award letters for accepted students yet. We're set to do that next week, but that's typical.
Right. No, and I think that's really important. Now, we're gonna just, Kat did a really great job actually of defining cost of attendance. I'm gonna pop this on the screen. Cost of attendance and the expected family contribution. These are things, and this, we'll actually make sure that you have access to this information. So it's a nice little, slide to sort of come back to if there's some confusion in how to explain these particular components. The one piece I will just say, and actually it is noted in italics there, the expected family contribution, that's a number that's determined based on a formula that's established by law. So it is essentially the key component for a financial aid office to determine eligibility for a student. It is not the amount that a student or family will pay. To Kat's point, this terminology, the way it's calculated, that will change after this next kind of wave, right, of your seniors entering college next year. But it is important because it's often confused by families to say, oh gosh, I thought that's what I had to pay. There are two other pieces that may be presented to your students. The idea of special circumstances or special conditions, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's really just to say if a student or a family, there is a change in their circumstances from the information that was completed on the FAFSA to what they're experiencing today. Could be death of a parent, could be job loss, income changes, a separation or divorce. The key, if there are changes to the student situation, is to communicate with the individual school that they are applying to. Talk to your financial aid offices, talk to your admission counselors to determine what information a school may need to consider those special circumstances. And then finally, verification. This is a process in which when the student completes the FAFSA, they may be what's called selected by the Department of Education for verification, which essentially just means financial aid offices are required. It is roughly a third of all FAFSAs are flagged. Doesn't mean that the student did something wrong. What it means is the financial aid office must verify the information on those FAFSA forms. Let's see, I'm actually going to jump right into, again, we actually covered this for institutional financial aid. Again, just keeping in mind there may be additional forms that school requires. Here is just, again, and Kat just spoke to this, it's just a nice visual. We talked about kind of cost of attendance, we talked about expected family contribution. This is how they work together. So if you think of it as essentially, it is a math problem. It is cost of attendance minus the expected family contribution will calculate how much financial need that family has, that family demonstrates. And that is the number that is utilized by your financial aid offices to calculate eligibility, again, for grants, for loans, for federal work study. States may also use this, that expected family contribution to determine eligibility for state grant information as well.
Now, Carrie, quickly, does this mean that one could have a different financial need depending on the school?
Yes, so the cost of attendance may vary from schools to schools. The EFC will remain the same to each school. So that cost of attendance changing, that's what changes that financial need across the schools, even though that EFC from FAFSA stays the same.
Great.
Well, this actually doesn't show you the EFC, but this is really where you can see, and actually I'll take it back. Kat, it's so nice that you're providing some of this information. We can kind of weave this through. When Kat spoke about some of those required components on the financial aid offer, this of course is just a sample. This is not exactly how a financial aid offer will look. Those of you on the phone may have seen a variety of different offers from different schools over the years, but essentially And again, sometimes they're called letters, sometimes they're called offers or awards. They all basically mean the same thing. So this is the kind of, and we'll break down each of these sections over the next few slides, but essentially the hope is that institutions will provide a breakdown similar to what you see here. So at the very top, you have your cost of attendance. This again, and this is very important, this will showcase how much that institution costs for 1 year. Financial aid is provided annually. So if a student is enrolling in a 2-year program, if a student is enrolling in a 4-year program or more, it is important for them to understand this is just the cost for year 1 or year 2 or year 3. And it can change if the components, particularly at the very top here, of the cost of attendance changes from year to year. And so you can see in this example, you have your tuition and fees. Kat mentioned it may be broken down into each semester, fall and spring, and then the full year calculation on the far right. You have your food and housing expenses, particularly if you have a student that is living on campus, that will be included in here. Even if they are living off campus, perhaps in an apartment, there are estimates provided for food and housing. I mean, students still need to eat and still need to live. Even if you're not paying the school directly for it, it is still considered in the cost of attendance. You have your books and supplies, your transportation, miscellaneous expenses to come up with that kind of total number. Here we have it broken out as well. And Kat mentioned the word free money. So you know, another thing to look for is, again, you have the cost of attendance at the top, free money is listed next. And then from there, it kind of breaks down into what else can be used. And like I said, we're actually going to walk through each of these components. But I will just kind of caveat, we don't want to make you nervous in saying there's no standard format, but the reality is there isn't. So this can look different. The words that you see on this slide, academic scholarship, state grant, federal Pell Grant, it can actually, the label might be different, right? And so it's really important to be very mindful about reading each of those titles and trying to understand it. So I'm actually going to jump right into just kind of the next slide to break this down a little bit further. We can have a conversation about it. This is really just tips and just kind of ways, really understanding again what you're looking at. We do hope that schools are providing, very clear breakdown of, what is gift aid. In other words, what's free money that does not need to be paid back. And then separating that out from other types of financial aid like federal student loans. And we will talk about that. They are financial aid or employment options like federal work study, if they are broken out, just to help families kind of understand what they're looking at. So let me just jump right into here. So cost of attendance. Again, not all schools will have their actual approved cost of attendance at the time that the award offer is set. Some institutions, particularly public schools, if those tuition and fee costs, for example, are based on the passing of a state budget, they may have estimated cost of attendance to provide, whereas another institution, private institution, may have already determined their actual cost of attendance. So it is also important to understand if the award offer the student has is an estimate or if it is an actual cost of attendance. I will say typically schools will also, and Kat, you can again keep me honest here. Schools typically also do provide cost of attendance on their website. And so while there may be an estimate on the financial aid offer, you can visit a school's website to look at their published breakdown like you see here. And you can also very directly just ask. If you're confused about any of these components, talk to your financial aid offices, talk to your admission counselors. about what these different components mean. Is that fair advice, Kat?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the award letters, it won't have the cost of attendance broken out like this, where it shows tuition fees, it might just say cost of attendance, and the amount, as opposed to the individual components. But a lot of schools do have like cost calculators, or you can always ask the bursar's office, which is the billing office at most schools.
As something to keep in mind, if an institutional award offer just says something like cost of attendance with a number, it will be very important for the student to understand what is included in that number. Because if indirect fees like those books and supplies, those miscellaneous or transportation expenses are not included in the final number, those are additional costs the student will incur. So when you're really trying to understand total costs, again, check with the billing office, the bursar's office, have a direct conversation to say, okay, and I hate to say it, typically there's a lot of information that's provided with a financial aid offer. Sometimes it's a lot of words, sometimes, and I'm gonna be honest with you, I don't always like to read everything that I get either, but it may also be spelled out, with a little asterisk to help you understand when a school's presenting cost of attendance, what exactly are they showing you? Is it just tuition and fees, or is it everything? So again, and Kat actually talked about grants and scholarships a little bit, gift aid. So again, this is money that does not need to be paid back. They are offered, numerous sources. You could see on a financial aid offer in this example, the academic scholarship. This is coming from the institution itself. There's a state grant listed here, federal Pell Grant, federal FSEOG. Now there can be numerous grants that you will find, or scholarships you will find on a financial aid offer, but when it comes to the federal government, there are two grants the federal government offers. So the federal Pell Grant, the two that you see here, and the federal, it actually stands for Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant, or FSEOG. Again, that might look a little bit different in the way that it's, kind of stated on an award offer. Now, Kat, you again, please make sure again that I'm not quoting the wrong number, but for the current academic year, for the 22-23 academic year, the Pell Grant, it is a need-based grant. The minimum amount is $711. The maximum is $6,895 for the year. And that again, if the student qualifies, financial aid office will make sure it is on their financial aid offer. And that other grant, the federal SEOG, this is awarded typically for students with exceptional need, and it is often awarded on a first come, first served basis.
So, Katrina, quick question. So Kerry mentioned FSEOG is often first come, first served. Does this mean that there are limited funds available? And can you shed some light on how financial aid determines this grant?
Yeah, so FSEOG funds are limited, and it's up to the school, each individual school, on how those funds are awarded to students. So, for example, the Department of Education does give schools like a set amount of FSEOG funds each year to award to students. There are requirements around that. So if a student is eligible for a federal Pell Grant, they could be eligible for the FSEOG. They are linked. So you won't see a student awarded SEOG without also having a Pell Grant. Here, for example, here at Westchester, in order to be eligible for an FSEOG grant, it is first come, first serve. So, and by that, we mean students who file their FAFSA October 1, who first file their FAFSA are first considered, and then students with the greatest financial need. Call back to before, that's the cost of attendance minus EFC equals financial need. So the students with the greatest financial need can receive the SEOG funds.
Okay, and one quick follow-up. Can you speak to state grants as well? I mean, are they first come, first served, or do they require separate application? And does FIA offer additional grant programs? Please.
Yeah, so for the PA state grant, the main requirement is you have to be a Pennsylvania resident of at least 5 years. You also need to file the FAFSA by May 1st each year to be considered. It is based in part on EFC. Right now, for this current year, the maximum award for the PA state grant is $5,750. Pennsylvania does reciprocate with 6 other states: Delaware, DC, Massachusetts, Ohio, Vermont, and West Virginia. Unfortunately, New Jersey, one of our closest states, does not reciprocate state grants. Students can be awarded up to $600 full-time or $800 for veterans. Students can be eligible as long as they are at least half-time, which is 6 credits for an undergraduate student. There are some other programs that FIA offers for educational purposes. So if you're working with students in high school, if any of those students are in foster care or foster youth, FIA does have the PA Fostering Independence Tuition Waiver Program, as well as the Chafee Education Grant. There are separate applications for those 2 grants. It's important to note that a lot of these programs here that you see on your screen do have an additional application. First-time PA state grant recipients do have to fill out the PA state grant form. The information, how FIA gets the information, is once the FAFSA is completed, if you're a Pennsylvania resident, you can select to send the information to FIA once the FAFSA is completed. And then we always recommend to students to go to FIA.org to see if they need to do any additional tasks to get their state grant or any other programs. And FIA offers PA state grant work study program. If the student's applying for a community college or one of the trade schools, there's the PA TIP, that's the PA targeted industry programs. So a lot of schools participate in all of these programs as well.
So I actually what I want to do now, because I am watching the time and want to keep everything running on time. We know that everybody's very busy. We don't want this to run over. I'm just going to touch on just a few more things. We do have more slides. The intent of this wasn't just to go through slide after slide after slide and kind of beat you over the head with this stuff, but I did want to just mention the employment options that may be on a financial offer, because I find, and Kat, you probably see this as well, this typically is a source of confusion. It is required to be placed on the financial aid offer itself because it is a type of financial aid. Now, whether it be federal work study, it could be an institutional working program. The confusion lies in that this provides the opportunity for a student to earn money for work. It's essentially like having a part-time job. Sometimes there's opportunity to work on campus. Sometimes certain approved off-campus work can be paid through this work study program. And so oftentimes I kind of look at this as a way for students to help with those indirect costs. This is not something that will be deducted from the student's bill. And so it is important. And in this example, when you calculate net costs, the true net cost is your total cost of attendance minus the free money. That is the total cost for that student to attend the institution. What comes next like like employment or working options, like federal student loan options, that again will be listed on the award offer. They are financial aid to help make college more affordable, but it is money that is paid back at this point. Once you start looking at the federal direct subsidized or unsubsidized loan, any additional loan offerings that may be provided as an option on an award offer, it is money that is repaid. So there is cost to those dollars. We could have an entire conversation, be happy, and Tom, here's our plug. I'm sure Kat would be, any, other stakeholders. We can have an entire conversation specifically about borrowing, about those kind of next steps. What happens now that I understand that price? How do I fill the gap? I'm not going to go through all this information. We will make sure that Tom has a PDF of this document. He can certainly distribute. There are some tips about, how to estimate that remaining balance and then what happens next, right? And I know, Tom, I believe you're actually going to also provide additional trainings within the series in which what you see on the screen here will be dug into a bit more, right? How do I pay now, right? How do I find outside scholarships, other free money? What's a payment plan? What kinds of education loans exist? That kind of thing. So being mindful of time, because I know we only have 5 minutes left, if it's fair to our presenters to kind of maybe just open up. I know there have been some, chat going on and some answers being, questions and answers being provided. Is there anything that we want to, kind of call out that's come through chat? Any unanswered questions out there?
Hey, Carrie, yeah, there's a couple in here that I think we should definitely touch on. One of them being is, how do students get selected for verification? So we talked about that in terms of the amount of students that get selected by the Department of Education. So once a student does the FAFSA, there's a couple different options. So the Department of Education can either select the student for verification or the school can. So in either instance, it's not a punishment. I know it might feel like that to a lot of people because we're requesting additional information, but sometimes there might be a discrepancy on the FAFSA. So for example, 1 year, if a student may say that they live with mom, and then the next year they may say that they live with dad, that might be a discrepancy that the school wants to verify. There are also some schools, like Carrie mentioned, the CSS profile. Some schools require verification of all students who do the FAFSA. There's a couple of schools that I can think of that come to mind that require the CSS profile, that all the financial aid offices for those schools will select each student for verification.
We dropped the link for CSS profile in the chat, and on that page, you can look up the listing of the participating schools that use CSS profile.
Perfect. Thank you, Tom. The other one I could see is what was the EFC cutoff for federal Pell eligibility? So for this academic year, the 22-23 academic year, the EFC has to be below $6,206 to be considered for a federal Pell Grant.
There's actually one question that's in chat that I just noticed, and it's regarding scholarship displacement policies. Kerry or Kat, can either of you address that?
So, and I'll take a stab, and Kat, please chime in. So scholarship displacement policy, I'm reading that, or I'm hearing that, I should say, to mean if a student receives an outside scholarship, right, they in their community, various scholarships that are not on the financial aid offer, this is something they found on their own. Some schools do provide, I shouldn't say this, some schools typically have a policy with regards to outside scholarships. In other words, there's typically a certain dollar amount that a student can find outside that can be applied to their financial aid, that can be applied to their bill, before any other component, such as institutional scholarship dollars, are reduced. In other words, students can bring in as much financial aid outside of the school that they can find. However, it is calculated as part of their financial need, and so it can shift the other components.
Well,
of
Carrie, I
finan-
just want to make a slight correction because there is a new state law
good.
in Pennsylvania regarding that. So if a student is awarded already a institutional scholarship or grant, and then later is then awarded an outside scholarship, so a scholarship from not the institution itself, the institution is no longer allowed to reduce that component, the institutional funds, unless it goes, the outside scholarship is so large that it goes over that cost of attendance, over that budget. So if a student is awarded institutional funds, they are, in Pennsylvania specifically, they are no longer allowed to reduce the initial offered institutional funds.
What I'd like to do is offer the opportunity for questions to stay open till, we're going to keep the session open till 12:15. If you can stay, you can. If you can't, that's fine. Before you leave though, just want to say, I feel like we're going to need a part 2 to this. So look for an email or announcement about a part 2 going into how to help a student read their award letter. Look for that. We're going to have a couple of other session series as well regarding financial aid, moving on further down the line. So we're not closing. Just wanted to say that because I know a bunch of people are planning to be out of here. They're going into their 12 o'clock meetings, but if you can hang for another 15 minutes, we'll continue to address questions, but know there will be a part 2 to this session. I'm going to work with my colleagues on this call right now, and we're going to go a little further down the line.
And I apologize. I do have to leave. The ironic thing is, for Westchester, I'm about to go film a new award letter video that is going to be sent to all of our undergrad and graduate students explaining the award letter. So all the students from Westchester will see my beautiful face on their award letters. And I do have to go, but I did put my email in the chat, and I trust Carrie that anything questions you might have, she would be more than capable of answering. And if you do have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me as well. Thank you, guys.
And Darwin, maybe you can let me know if there's any other, and certainly, I mean, if folks have questions, again, we are mindful of your time. You know, we're very happy for you to have joined us and kind of stuck with us this far. This could be a really big topic, so happy to provide any additional information down the line. And we'll make sure certainly that you have Darwin and my contact information as well.
So Arvia Hall from Atlanta, Georgia area wrote a message in the chat saying there has been a recent article stating nationwide there was over 33 billion in unclaimed Pell Grants for the class of 2022. Where does that money go? And as I know, it doesn't just roll over into the next year.
Yeah, that's a good one, because I actually think I saw the headline yesterday. And Darwin, you may be able to speak to this. I actually didn't have a chance to read the article as to what they're actually quoting. A lot of times when articles quote, you know, Pell Grants left on the table, or this much financial aid students didn't access, typically is related to the FAFSA completion rates that we're seeing. So in other words, the idea is not necessarily that students turn down free money, it's that they didn't complete a FAFSA, and had they completed it, they may have been eligible to get financial aid to make costs more affordable. So I think it really kind of points to the value of applying for financial aid. There is no, you know, I make too much money, oh, I won't qualify. Like every single student should apply for financial aid. So, and Jarwin, did you have a chance to read that article? Am I misrepresenting what that?
Yeah, so I didn't get through the full article, but to your point, what you stated, I agree with you. I think that has to do with really FAFSA completion as the driver behind that. And really just focusing and emphasizing the need to complete the FAFSA and really not let income or anything of the sort stand in your way, or really clearing some misconceptions as to whether or not you'd be eligible. I mean, everyone for the most part walks away with some type of aid and award. So that FAFSA completion is critical.
I also want to kind of lead into the displacement conversation. I think I see Linda from FIA has chimed in on the displacement legislation issue, and I read it more from where she is. The displacement issue or the new law that's been enacted is speaking to the public colleges and universities, not the privates. But my understanding is from our colleague, Michelle Johnson, who interacts a lot with, from a national perspective on scholarship displacement, who is part of our PCPR network and comes and talks to us monthly, is that Pennsylvania is entertaining some new legislations that would speak to privates. But right now, I think the legislation is only speaking to the publics.